Excited. Well, welcome everyone. I think that we've got everybody out of our waiting room. That was a great little crowd. I wish I could say, did you guys all mingle well? So did you meet a new friend? But I don't think we've quite gotten there yet with Zoom. So I'm April Berg, and just welcome to this town hall. We are just happy to be in Snohomish tonight, doing things a little differently than the traditional town hall. And I'm just excited that we have so many folks joining us. And of course, former Mayor Karen Guzak. And I'm going to kind of try and follow our run of show. And I'm going to give it over to my amazing campaign manager, Catherine, to just take us through a couple of the tech rules so that everybody knows what we're doing tonight.
Thank you, April. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. I'm April's campaign manager. And I just want to thank you all so much for being here. This is it's bound to be a great conversation. And I'm just going to ask that everyone keeps their mics muted and you use the chat function to ask questions. And it will be easiest if you could just label your question with the topic. So if it has to do with education or transportation, label it, give us a colon, and then write your question so that we can bring it in at the right time. And we really just want to highlight the fact that this is a town hall and we want to hear from you so that when April and John are legislating in Olympia, they'll remember these conversations. So thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to hand it over to my friend Sam, who is John Lovick's campaign manager.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate it, and thank you for welcoming me into this Zoom room. I'm happy to share the space with everyone. And just to kind of preface, John had asked that I make public his pinky promise to get onto your next town hall and your next virtual event, because unfortunately John was triple booked tonight. It was a couple of scheduling errors had actually intersected, so he had to he's actually in the office right now taking a couple of official business phone calls. But if you ask me, all the more reason that we need to be having these conversations, all the more reason that we need to make sure that John and April are both prepped when they hit this legislative session, is so that they can start sprinting into building our communities back, sprinting into building our state, right? Like we want representatives that are going to come to the table fully equipped and fully ready, already having had these discussions. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to go in and change my my name to Sam Gutierrez, but it's going to be Sam G parentheses Rep Lovick. I'll be speaking on his behalf as much as I can. I definitely know that I'm not John Lovick, but I work so close with John that I feel that I can help to answer any questions or help to guide any conversation in any way that he would. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sam. And are you going to be playing John in this next part?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you. And so it's my really great honor, not just as John today, but also as Sam Gutierrez, the field organizer who worked for Elizabeth Warren's campaign before this, to introduce Karen Guzak, the former mayor of Snohomish. Karen and I met on the campaign trail of the Warren presidential, where she so courageously hosted us in her home to throw a fantastic event, recruiting volunteers and really feeding into that grassroots energy. I couldn't be more honored to introduce you, Karen. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Other than we got past the technical difficulties, I'm just so happy to be here with these two fabulous candidates, April Berg and John Lovick. And Sam, yes, I've known you now for like 3 years or something like that. I feel like you're part of the family here, as is John. I've known John Lovick for probably 10 or 12 years from when I started first on council well over 12 years ago. And it's nice to see so many friendly faces in this Zoom room here. So we've got, we're hoping for lots of questions here in this town hall format, but I've got some questions that we can use to start off. So is it okay if we just jump in, April and Sam G, who is John L?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, yep, that's perfect.
And again, I see so many people that I know. So I have basically, there's 3 areas that I think are really important at our state, at the state level, that impact the city of Snohomish. And they are education, transportation, and housing. And then there's a fourth issue, which April, you brought up in an email today. It was after Trump's debate last night and his embrace of Proud Boys. And we have in May, we had a Proud Boy event here in the city of Snohomish. And so let's save that for later, and there may be more comments about that. But do you want to start first and talk a little bit about education? I mean, clearly we're challenged in COVID right now. When are schools going to open? How are we going to handle this? Would love to hear whatever you have to say.
Yeah, thank you. And I will tell you, this has been one of the most challenging things of my personal and kind of professional career doing education and education policy making. For those of you who don't know me, who I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm a school board director. I'm a school board director for the Everett School District. I'm a former director for the Edmonds School District. So education policy is something that I care passionately about and I've been doing for years. My daughter's school, Jackson High School, was the first school in the nation to have a COVID positive student. So for this specific public health crisis, I was immediately thrown into a national leadership role. We have had no and have no federal leadership in this. So school districts like mine had to really come up with a plan, and that's what we did. So a couple of things about what we did do. One thing was talk to all of our parents about what did they need in terms of food, in terms of technology, as well as emergency childcare, and we were able to provide those things. As we fast forward into reopening, honestly, in March we wouldn't have dreamed we'd still be here. We thought we would be back to some kind of quasi new normal, something with a hybrid possible thing. Instead, we're still completely shut down. So we're still doing as districts what we need to do, but we need support. And part of why I'm running for the legislature is so that we can get support to our school districts. So a couple of things there. As we reopen, we need to do it safely. We need to put the safety of our kiddos and our teachers first. We need to not do it, haphazardly, and we always need to look at our Snohomish County Health Department for direction. As we get that direction, as our numbers go down, we need to open in a slow, measured, methodical manner, and doing it hybrid, a hybrid type situation in classrooms that start with our most in-need students, our special ed populations, our pre-K kindergarten, and then kind of stair-stepping it from there. The biggest thing with this crisis is funding. And so from a state level, the state needs to step in and not really cut the safety net that we've worked so hard to provide. The majority of our state's budget does go to K-12 education. It needs to continue that way, even though we are in a public health crisis. This is truly a disaster. And as I will tell my colleagues in Olympia when I get there, in a disaster, you don't tell a hurricane victim, what can you cut out of your budget? How can we take away a little more? What don't you need today now that you've lost everything? And so that's not something we're going to be doing to our schools when I get to Olympia. We're going to be saying, what more can we do? What more do you need? And as districts and parents and educators reimagine education, the state needs to be a partner with them, as well as being an advocate to the federal government to get the funding that we need so that we can maintain our schools safely. So that's kind of where my head is in terms of COVID. And I'll tell you, it's what I've been doing each and every day to help reopen our schools.
Thank you. That's great. So I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. So how are we going to handle that? Catherine, are you going to read them? What are we going to do? Questions about education.
Yeah. So I think that it would be easiest to, for example, I can see that we have 2 education questions in the chat, and I can read them, but I think going forward it may be easiest for you to read them. But I can read this one from Kathy that has to do with education, and then as we go on to housing and transportation, we can read the questions that have to do with those topics.
So hey, Catherine, why don't you go ahead and read the questions? I think that for tonight, let's do that, and then that way, and then Karen, would that be okay, or do you want to read them?
I just have to put on my glasses. That's all.
I was going to ask, like, whatever's easier.
But I can do that. I can put on my glasses.
Do you want to? Okay, yeah, and also you might be able to. You can edit them too if you feel like we've already covered it or something like that.
Okay,
but I'll let you guys deal with it.
Okay, good. So so this first question is from Kathy. and it is about education. Can you tell us what legislation will you put forward to help schools have adequate funding to reopen schools safely? Now, I know you just spoke to the issue relative to that, but do you want to enhance that comment anymore?
Yeah, so you asked about funding and reopening schools safely. So for me, the key, and this sounds so terrible, but the key is going to be to protect the funding that we have for schools. There's going to be a lot of folks coming at ed budgets because it is the majority of our general fund budgets. So my goal is to protect the funding that we currently have going to K-12. That said, I do have a piece of legislation that I will be actively promoting as a freshman legislator, and that is to change our current capital bond funding policy to a simple majority. We are one of only 4 states that does not do that. Why does that matter, right? It matters clearly for kiddos and getting the schools funded the way we need to, but it matters for infrastructure. During a public health crisis, the best way to get our economy back open and growing is through infrastructure projects. Infrastructure projects that help schools, well, it's doubly good. It is ridiculous that we have not been able to change this legislation. So it's top of my list. I'm actually going to ask our amazing speaker to be placed on the education committee. I want this to happen, and I think we're at a point where it needs to happen. So that's where my time will be spent.
Well, I think that's a great answer. And I do know that here in the city of Snohomish, prior to COVID, a bond issue was raised to do some new building projects here, to complete the building projects that we had started many years ago, and it failed because it was, the requirement for, supermajority of votes, and it's a challenge. Of course, now many of the schools are closed, and so the fact that they can't be heated and that the roofs are leaking is not such a big deal. But there's another question here from Linda Redmond, our wonderful council person here, and there's a couple of council people on this Zoom call. She said there are concerns about the schools losing students due to being closed and thus losing funding to open back up. What ideas are being considered to provide adequate funding for those students that we might lose?
That is a great question. So I'll tell you, through the spring, we were able to keep our apportionment from the state stable. So that meant the state said, look, we know it's a pandemic. You don't have to worry about attendance. We're going to fund you where you were when you stopped in-person learning. Fast forward to now, we are taking daily attendance, and our apportionments are going to match our actual daily attendant population. I know for our district in Everett, it is down. I'm sure Snohomish is down by a few kiddos as well. Luckily, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio when it comes to apportionment funding. It's one of those wonky formulas that basically means even if you have 100 or 200 kiddos down, you're not going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars because of that. There is some wiggle room, if you will. And a lot of districts do budget for those kind of ups and downs, because as a lot of us know in education funding, it's that 8-day count, right, that we're basing a lot of our projections on. So we don't know. I mean, we absolutely don't know what our numbers will look like until that count comes in. With them being down, it's hard. The funding will be dropped. I will tell you, we are trying to get creative, and the state is encouraging the creativity to use and calculate differently. What's the best way to put it? To try and calculate for what we're actually doing now. So for instance, we don't have kiddos in the cafeteria getting their hot lunch, but we do have meals being provided in mass. So how do we get those workers providing those meals and get those workers paid adequately for the meals that they're provided? So there is a formula out there to do that. Part of it's federal money, part of it's state money. It's working, and we haven't had to furlough or lay off workers in that particular scenario. But I think the other piece of your question is key, right? Like, how do we keep these programs that we have in place so that when enrollment projections go back up, when folks come back to our schools, we still have them in a good situation. And I'll tell you, the districts, Marysville, Snohomish, Everett, Lake Stevens, these are all amazing districts in our 44th who are actively working collaboratively and collectively at the state level to make sure this happens. So I can't tell you, particularly how the sausage is made for each and every district, but I can tell you those questions are being asked, and we are really looking to the state. I'm putting on my school board director hat, right? We're looking to our state legislators to work with us in partnership so that our schools come out of this hole. I'm going to put on my potential state legislator hat and say, that's going to happen. Our schools are going to stay whole. We're not going to miss a beat after this pandemic. But I think I'm glad you asked that question, because as a city leader, I think it's going to be really important for all of your voices to be heard at the state level about education and education funding.
That's
Thanks so
fantastic.
much.
And if I may add too, I've heard John say this so many times, and just to address a couple of the new folks that I saw trickle into, I'm Sam Gutierrez. I'm John Lovick's campaign manager. He was triple booked this evening, unfortunately, with some official business. So just kind of standing in and for John in whatever capacity I can serve. But I've heard John say this many times, that this conversation on funding and school funding to him, as it pertains to a decrease, or I mean, for him this is a non-starter. This is something like we just funded education, and quite frankly, we just it's still underfunded, and it's still, we still need to work on these things. John voted on legislation that passed, House Bill 1216, seeing safety and well-being for students. We're seeing that that's going to mean something completely different this time around, right? Like safety and well-being for students is Candidate Berg said, this is something that has to be. Did you catch my Freudian slip? It was a good one.
I caught that. That was a good one. Touch wood. I'm on that.
Yeah, I won't apologize. I will not apologize. Yeah, no. So just to reiterate, as clear as I can say it, John, this is a non-starter for John. We have to prioritize this. We just passed it in the 2019 legislative session. We're going to have to fight to keep it on the table.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. And I'm glad that you jumped in, Sam. It's important that you speak for John, and you know him so well. So I'm seeing one last little chat thing here regarding education. And this is Robin McGee responding to Merritt Weiss. April, in your conversation with teens and college age voters, what are the topics that you're hearing that are most critical to them? And are these very different or similar topics to when you were a student yourself, is what this says?
That is a great question. And so I will say, our campaign, my campaign is really student powered. And so we have amazing students commenting and talking with us all the time, talking with me all the time. We just held our second student town hall last week. And they, it's hard, right? So we're in the middle of a pandemic. With unprecedented conversations being had about racial justice and education being reimagined. So I'll tell you, they're not the same conversations I had as a student or as a student leader, but some of them, there is some similarity, and that part of it really kind of stinks. I wish we would have made further progress on different things like ethnic studies in our schools, like the conversations we're having around racial injustice and equity. So some of that is similar, but I will say the difference, and right now in this moment when we engage with our students, is the passion and the focus. And it's amazing. So we've got students in all of the districts. We've got students, especially in Snohomish. I got to shout out to our Snohomish school district. I know we've got some teachers on in the town hall. You guys do an amazing job at civics education. I mean, it is literally renowned, throughout the North End, because you guys really get it done with students in terms of not only giving them that foundation of civics, but also making them practice in the community with that 8 hours of community service that they have to do. And literally kudos. So the difference right now is these kids, they're not just coming with, oh, I think I want to go phone bank, or, oh, let me go wave a sign. They're coming with laundry lists of, I want to get active. How do I talk to my legislator? How do I turn issues into actions into strategy? And how do I really serve my community? And to just give you one example of what we've been doing with our students in our town halls, we always want them to have a takeaway. So one of the town halls, we had someone come in and talk with them about direct action organizing and how to turn those kind of issues into actions. This last one, we had someone from actually from Snohomish Equity come in and give them bystander training. And I will tell you, I was taking notes. If people on the town hall have not been through bystander training, this is a phenomenal opportunity. It's very unique, and you can do it through Snohomish Equity. And it teaches you how to be a good bystander in really difficult situations, specifically in this in the scenarios they laid out dealing with racial prejudice and inequities. But I mean, honestly, I took notes. But these students, well, first off, it was a student that trained us. The students were asking amazing asking questions. The students were talking about scenarios they had been in where this training would have been helpful. And then they were talking about what they were going to do with it once they got back to IRL school, right? In real life. I learned that too. So it's just one of those things where it's just the passion and the focus of these young people, both on my campaign and in the community, is different than when I was in school. It is absolutely different. So thank you for that question, and thank you for letting me give a shout out to the amazing students in the city of Snohomish.
Yes, and Snohomish Equity, we give a really shout out to those folks that are doing
Absolutely.
really, really important work.
I have
So
to say, I
Go
have
ahead,
to share something, something very heartwarming. John, just today, he said, he reminded me, Sam, he said, I'm so sorry you're missing probably the best. He said this. He said, you're missing probably the best aspect of this, of campaigning in general. I'm so sorry we can't get down to those schools and recruit, and recruit there. He has. I mean, I would say, if I could see everyone raise a hand, like raise your hand if John Lovick visited your school, right? Like, and taught you about politics, and or maybe brought you into the political process. Hundreds of students every year or every election cycle.
Absolutely.
And it broke my heart in some way, but also I was inspired. My sister's an educator, and I'm seeing how she's engaging students in different aspects. And there's a lot of fight there. There's a lot of fight. But yeah, I just thought I'd share that because John is huge on that. He said the best part of the campaign.
Well,
Absolutely.
and another testimonial here, I'm looking in the chat. Kathy Christensen said that I have 2 grandkids at Cascade and 1 at MP, and I know April and count them lucky to have April and John Lovick fighting for us all. So absolutely great. So I'm looking also at the clock, and I'm not seeing any more education questions here. So let's go on to this concept of transportation that I mentioned, and there's sort of these large pockets of money that are required from the state that come back to our city. We obviously have gotten some money. Steve Hobbs, our state senator, is part of the transportation. I think he's the chair of the transportation budget committee, and we have money that's been on the books for many years to widen and build another bridge along the Snohomish River. And so that's a big project, multiple millions of dollars, like 142 million last time I heard. But clearly we look to the state about transportation. And as I'm looking out here at Snohomish, traffic's coming back to pre-COVID levels, it seems to me, and will no doubt get worse, and more people moving here. And as climate change is bringing lots of folks, I think, from the south up to the north and to our beautiful rainy region. And I wanted to know, April, and also Sam G, Reed, John L, what you think about transportation and what your approach is going to be.
Yeah, transportation. Yeah, absolutely. No, transportation is it's a hot issue, and it's necessary. Being in the 44th, we know what transportation is like, and it is a mess. And we cannot forget that. We cannot put projects kind of on hold. It broke my heart when I read a couple of days, actually a couple weeks ago in the Herald, where they were talking about one of the projects being put on hold and canceled, and all because of a kind of a shortfall that was being projected. And of course that got taken care of, and it's back on track. But it's things like that as legislators, I'll be there advocating for you. One of the committees that I do want to sit on, that Representative Mead is actually on currently, is transportation, because it is that important to our district. So that said, how do we make this work with budget shortfalls during a pandemic, during a time where people are really talking about things like education and healthcare? Well, one of the things I've been advocating, and I'll continue to advocate for, is really a measured approach to transportation projects. So what that means is not completely delaying and stopping them, but starting with some of the less expensive aspects of them. And that's that design phase, that's that engineering phase. And the reason for that is because those phases have to be started anyway. So as we pass these projects, we can do it in a measured way so that we're not doing the most expensive things first. And we can kind of do a measured approach, see where the funding is going to come from, understand it better, but still be on track to get them implemented. I think the worst thing that we've seen happen on the north end, it's kind of being forgotten in the conversation about transportation regionally. And so as you see light rail rail and other hub and spoke type things with the Swift bus, et cetera, they haven't really reached the North End to a point where we feel like we're getting our value for things like sound transit. And of course, we saw that with the voters a couple of elections ago. So I've been talking with Senator Hobbs, as Karen said, you know, he is an amazing advocate for the 44th when it comes to transportation. We've been in communication. He's endorsed me. He's like, April, we're getting this done. I have been looking at his forward Washington policy and proposals. I am a big believer in what he's laid out as our funding policy and plan, and I will be an advocate for him in the House and in that proposal to really get it done in the 44th. But again, it's a measured approach so that these won't be cut as we're talking about revenue shortfalls. And honestly, they won't be delayed because we're still having to be in that design and engineering phase for so many of our important projects. But Sam, you might have a little more to say about that.
No, that was great. And John is also on the transportation committee as well. And you know, John's core, you know, a couple of his core values and core campaign principles, every time he comes back to the ledge, he's always running on good, safe schools, good, safe roads, and good jobs with benefits, right? So good, you know, good, safe roads, making sure that people can, you know, use these public easeways and use their, you know, travel to not just places to work, but places of leisure as well. It's gigantically important to John, and he's really working on and constantly thinking. Yet, you know, he has these three principles, and he intends to provide in the same way. But the sort of attack strategy is completely different. There's so much more on the table, as April said as well. There's so much more that, you know, we have to consider. It's a very tricky conversation, but one John is really involved in.
Yeah. Right. Well, one of the problems with transportation is that the gas tax is decreasing as our automobiles get to be more efficient and there's more electric vehicles on the road. And so the issue around then how do we tax people? Toll roads are certainly one way to do that so that you get a use tax rather than a gas tax. But there's some pushback to that. And I know that the State Department of Transportation is doing some, and I like your word, measured projects that are starting to toll roads to try to increase the revenue there. And clearly, as you say, you know, City of Snohomish is outside the Sound Transit taxing district. So we are not going to get Sounder here. And we'll be happy to have Sounder in Everett when it comes in 2035, I think is the last date. I'm not sure I'm going to be alive there, but you know, I'll come and help them cut the ribbon.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you brought that up too, Karen, because one of the things, and I was talking with some constituents about that, right, about where you guys sit, because you know the other thing that's coming that I'm on the planning commission for the city of Mill Creek for is the Orange Line, right, and that Orange Line is going to be right up Seattle Hill Road, and what that's going to do for you is get you directly connected to the Linwood Transit Center. So, and I know again it's that hub and spoke, and it's not the most direct route, but man, it's going to be a game changer because you'll be able to go straight from that corner, you know, up Seattle Hill Road, right there on 164th Bothell Everett Highway, and get straight to Linwood Transit, and then straight, if you want, all the way down to SeaTac and beyond. So that's something that's definitely in the works. Yeah,
that's going to be a great thing for our city of Snohomish. And of course, public transportation is really impacted now by COVID and our requirement to be socially distanced. And I know that probably the bus schedule has been reduced as a result of that. But I'm going to look in the chat and see if I see anything about transportation. I don't see anything here about transportation. There's a really interesting question from Howard, which we'll get to later about Proud Boys. But unless somebody wants to come up with another question about transportation, we can go on to talk about housing, which is another issue that is certainly impacted by how we get served by our representatives in Olympia. And there is a good question here from Linda Redmond, again, who is so great with her questions. She said, housing. We may see some real problems with loss of housing depending on how well our economy recovers. There is a 1 in 10 of 1% sales tax that can be implemented locally to address what may be a crisis. What is your opinion of this as a revenue option? This 1/10 of 1% sales tax that can be implemented locally to address what may be a crisis.
So I will, Linda, that is a great question. And it's one of those things you can get me going all day on tax policy. And I, I have to preface my answer with, I'm not a fan of sales taxes just because they're so regressive. And the folks that we're trying to help are the folks that get hit the worst with any type of hikes in sales tax. It is a local jurisdiction decision, right? Like that specific one. And I know some localities have really kind of shied away from it, mostly because the sales tax is such a burden on so many working families. So I will tell you, I am a housing first advocate. I will be right there fighting for you for additional dollars in local communities to enhance housing, especially for our missing middle, right? Our workforce housing. So we need all three sets of housing. We need low income, we need workforce, and we need market rate, but we have to have all three to make the system work. That said, I am going to be fighting for progressive tax policy changes. One of the committees I do want to sit on is finance. I believe that I can really use my chops and my advocacy to make some fiscal change in our state. And during a pandemic, it's when we have to have these conversations about our regressive tax structure and our over-reliance on sales tax. So I'm with you, like in the heart of that. I just think that we can get there another way. But I just want to be super clear. It's not raising taxes. It's closing tax loopholes. It's right-sizing our tax code so that it's not a burden on working families and small businesses. And I think folks will see more money in their pocket at the end of it, and we'll get more things like mental health, behavioral health services, substance abuse, housing, and honestly, more dollars for education, because even though it takes up the bulk of it, it actually, there's needs and gaps there. So, but I'm with you that we do need to find more revenue sources for additional housing.
Thanks so much. So Sam, did
Absolutely.
you want to say anything around what John's proposals might be or his point of view?
Yeah. John has a unique point of view, especially in tax structure. When John was appointed as Speaker of the House in 2017 for several months, and in that period, he was actually, historically the first Black or African American Speaker of the House ever in Washington State history, acting Speaker, because he was Speaker pro tem who bumped up, right? But he appointed the bipartisan tax structure work group. This is a work group, again, bipartisan, that's looking at this tax code. April Berg is 100% right. I mean, I can't put an exact number on it because this is recorded, and I don't want to sound like I'm misquoting, but a long time. It's been a long time since we've rewritten this structure or looked at the tax system. And John, this is something John is fighting for literally every single day, bringing it up almost every single day in different meetings and committees, is that we need to look at this and how it constantly disadvantages those who, especially now in the era of the coronavirus and COVID-19, it disadvantages those who need help and assistance the most, those who need breaks the most. We can't be, we have to rebuild our economy. We have to get our lives back, but we cannot get it back. We can't build our economy on the backs of the middle class working families. That's what John believes, and he's constantly. I mean, he tells me this every day in the morning.
That's wonderful. So I want to go, speaking of this tax and sales tax, I want to go back just to transportation a little bit in the city of Snohomish. So when I was on council, I've been on council, as you know, 12 years. We passed about 7 years ago or 8 years ago a transportation benefit district at 0.2% sales tax increase, which has allowed us to do like a roundabout and a widening of the street up behind Fred Meyer that intersects with Highway 9, and a lot of street preservation. And it's made a huge difference in the infrastructure here in the city of Snohomish relative to our how our streets and roads are handled. And that will be coming up again for voter approval when the 10 years expires from the Transportation Benefit District. But I'm putting a plug in that I think it's been one of the great things that we've done. And thank goodness that for our Snohomish voters that realize the benefits that they've found and that will continue with those benefits. So just my plug for transportation dollars that come from our local voters. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So any more questions or thoughts about transportation before we go on to, oh, well, actually, we've already gone on to housing. I've got a local fly that is just really attracted to me and my kitty who's nearby. The kitty's trying to catch the fly. So if we do a little crash here, it's going to be really kind of exciting. But any more things about housing. I know that Housing Hope locally in our region has been an extremely important partner for those of us in the city and the county and the state for helping to provide housing at all kinds of levels. And over in the city of Everett, of course, their wonderful new project that's award-winning for being a really ultimate green building. And with the restaurant downstairs has been just a treasure and a gift to all of us in this region by Housing Hope. And I know Linda was on that East County board for a while, and we have to thank her for that too. So are we ready to go on to this issue of the Proud Boys? Kind of interesting. So let's see. Oh, let's talk. Yeah, Linda read this before we go to Proud Boys. So Donna Ray says to everyone, what is your position on state income tax? And then Linda Redmond says the Transportation Benefit District has allowed us to leverage dollars for grant funding. That's true. And Christy Norman says, this is about taxes again, our state will continue to be tax regressive until we establish a state income tax that holds the wealthier residents to the same standards as the less wealthy. So should we spend a little bit of time talking about taxes, since there's three comments / questions about that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's talk about taxes. You know, it's not something that that's really fun, right? Like, we don't love talking about it. So I just want to be really plain in my language. I do not advocate, and I will not advocate for a state income tax. That is not what I believe in and what I will advocate for. But I do believe in right sizing our tax code and making it far less regressive. And that is closing the loopholes that we currently have in our current tax system. You know, it's hard because it's been a long time with us going down this path of a regressive tax code. So there's a lot of things that we need to change about it. So again, back to kind of that measured approach, we have to start that dial on taxation, that conversation on taxation, and start to close those loopholes. Part of closing those loopholes is taxing gains that were not earned from income, right? Taxing capital gains and having a conversation about that, not in the sense of federal capital gains, which would tax things like income earned from personal property sales, but things like you know, high income earners that are earning things off of things like hedge funds and stocks and selling high-end artwork. And honestly, you know, in a pandemic, looking at billionaires who quite frankly are making more billions, that it just means that we are not having the right conversations about taxation. So that's where I think we need to start that conversation. But I do not believe at this point in a state income tax.
Can I just go ahead, Sam?
Oh yeah, very briefly, John would agree. You know, we were just having this conversation a couple of days ago too, and he added the word ever in there. He said, I know, he was like, no, his quote was that it's unfair. Again, it's unfair to keep burdening working class families when, as April so eloquently put, you know, the billionaires are getting more money. They're getting more rich, right? And I forget the one billionaire's name, but he like only paid like $750 or you know, and
who's paid $750?
No, but the point in case is our code needs to be looked at. Our tax system needs to be really looked at. It's undergoing scrutiny currently, but we need to take it a whole step further. We need to change it to alleviate the burden that working class families are feeling, especially in times of COVID.
Well, I'm going to jump in because, of course, working class families are paying the burden of tax, and billionaires are not. And our billionaire in chief, in fact, you know, $750 in taxes paid is just incredible. And we have actually in our state several billionaires. Bill Gates, for example, Jeff Bezos, for example. And as you know, Bill Gates has said, tax me. And I, as you know, a senior citizen here and not a wealthy one, but really believe in an state income tax for taxing the wealthy people. So, and I've been saying that for many years, and it sort of goes clunk as if, you know, it's an evil thing. But if Jeff Bezos is not going to pay any income tax at all, and he's one of, you know, the wealthiest guys in the world, and he lives in Washington State, you know, I think we're missing out on, you know, huge revenue opportunities. And, you know, what we provide for him, the rest of us are paying taxes for the roads, the schools, you know, the hospitals, the things that he and his, you know, his folks that work for him take advantage of. And so I'm in favor of taxing those really wealthy guys, but that's just me. So I'll be quiet about that now. So Shall we go to the juicy topic of
Yeah,
the
let's do that.
Proud Boys? And because we only have maybe 10 more minutes here. So, and this is, let me see if I can find, let's see, where was that question? I'm looking for the question.
I think it was from Howard.
From Howard, yeah. Where is that?
It's at 7:04 if you look on the thingy.
Okay, let's see. Catherine, Donna, Linda, Christy, Norman. I'm not seeing it. So Catherine,
sure,
can you see it? You see it? Because it was a great question, but it's about Proud Boys in the city of Snohomish. And are we letting the anti-maskers run riot here in our town?
Yeah, so I can read it.
Okay,
it's what's going on with the city of Snohomish. Car attack, Proud Boys, people walking around with masks. Has the town been completely taken over? Has the town been completely taken over by right-wing groups without masks?
Well,
that was the question.
Yeah, there it is. And so I'm glad to see it. And it's like by right-wing groups. And clearly, you know, May, whatever date that was in May, and I think Linda Redmond and some of the other council members will remember that date. We did have some Proud Boys in town and a Confederate flag, and our current mayor, John Kartak, who said that and continues to agree that this was a celebration, and our then chief of police, who's no longer here, he's in the county now, said also it was like, you know, it's like a beer party, except guys with guns and on the streets. And needless to say, there were lots of people in the city who spoke at council meetings with great deal of concern about this welcoming of the Proud Boys. And I'd love to have April, you can speak to that, and Sam speak to that too. And maybe even some of the city council members, Linda Redmond and Donna Ray is on this too, might even want to pitch in here.
Yeah, and Howard, thank you for that question. And I tell you, it's always top of mind. You know, as a woman of color, as a leader of color, as the mother of a Black son, I am always thinking about safety and the safety of my family. And when that happened on May 31st, I did feel less safe. Right, it was something that really triggered me in a way to make me feel less safe in a community that I had always felt safe in. And I think since that day, I've had a lot more direct conversations with leaders about what does community look like? What does safety look like? What does equity look like in our communities? And what those conversations look like is the acknowledgement of growth. You know, we're talking about a pandemic, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about growth and how do we do things in a better way? Well, I tell you what, people aren't going to get out there to shop on Main Street if they don't feel safe. People aren't going to come move to our communities and increase growth if they don't feel safe. And it's not a hypothetical question. I literally told this to a leader in one of the cities in the 44th. I said, this is not a hypothetical question. All you have to do is pull school district data. Go to your school district data and see what how many students of color you have in your district. And I'll tell you, for Everett, for Marysville, for most of the school districts out here, we're looking at right around 50% of students of color in these districts. You might think, wait a minute, that's a lot. It is. It's because the demographics are changing. And as we have young families moving into our communities, they tend to be younger and more diverse. And they truly want to feel safe. And so it's a conversation that intersects so many places. It intersects conversations on education, on economics, on basic Main Street math, if you will. So everybody has to jump in and be pulled into it so that all citizens can feel safe and all communities can thrive economically. And I say that because that's what I think people pay attention to. But I'll tell you, after last night's performance by our president, it brought all that back up again, right? I said, oh my gosh, here we go again. We're back to May 31st. So I'll just leave you with this. What I did, I'm putting on the hat as a mom, and as if like I had to have a hard discussion with our family last night after that performance by the president to say, what's the plan? So we woke up this morning and my husband sent a note to the county council as a citizen and said, what's the plan? I encourage you all in this call, send a note to your leaders, your mayors, your chiefs of police, your county councilmen, and say, what's the plan? Everybody heard loud and clear a dog whistle through a bullhorn, I think is one of the candidates said. And so we need to hold leaders accountable and ask, what's the plan? I'm telling you to call your local city and county leaders, because they're the ones who are over things like the police departments and the sheriff and things like that. So we need to really have the conversation now, not on November 4th. And not to act surprised. So we need a plan as a county of what are we going to do if they come back again, because they've already been out once. So that's kind of where my head is right now, but I'd love to hear what Sam and some of the other leaders have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, John, this is a direct John quote, which is also a direct someone quote, because he reads a lot of books that I don't know all the authors to, but he says, you stand for what you tolerate. That's exactly what John would say right now. I promise you, he would say that. And I get chills, it's sort of invoking those words of courage, because he said those to the leaders in those communities. He said that directly to these leaders. He said, you stand for what you tolerate. And he would say that, quite frankly, he would say that to our president, who we all know is fanning these flames, is saluting these folks and telling them to stand by, right? So you stand for what you tolerate is exactly what John would say. And then he would take it a step further. Just as April said, he would say, you vote, you make a plan to vote, you vote. You don't just vote this year, this election, this November, you vote every single year. John Lovick hasn't missed a voting election. He's voted in every single election since he was registered to vote. And it's because I might be misquoting the age range, but his grandma was a grandmother before she was able to vote. And that means something incredibly deep to him. He doesn't miss an opportunity. So John would absolutely agree, April. You hit the nail on the head. We have to vote. We have to hold these leaders accountable, and we have to make a plan to show up to that.
Thanks so much. I do know that I go to downtown Snohomish on a regular basis since I live so close, but I know that masks are required in every shop and restaurant that I've been in. Of course, now also the city, our economic development director, is making outdoor spaces for our restaurants on the street, and have bought wonderful tents now as we transition to colder weather. So I'm seeing right now at the grocery store and in town, lots of folks wearing masks. And so it seems to me that things are generally, that we're in a caring place, caring for each other, as I see. But I do think that council needs to make a plan. And I know in speaking with Linda Redmond about this, there is talk of a plan to work with our police department if there is any kind of problems around election time. And I'm seeing a couple of comments here about stickers that were really pretty hostile, if I recall, down there. Local racist incidents. And Snohomish for Equity, of course, has been very helpful. And folks can, oh yes, and members of the board were doxxed by someone posting their home addresses. Well, I've been doxxed. We know who doxes folks. So home address a lot. So we do have some nastiness here in our city, but I think generally speaking, most folks are tilting toward the good. So we're looking at having a couple of minutes left, because I know April and Sam, we want to close it down at 9:30.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there's a good question here. I was looking from Christy about how can we control access to weapons and military resources when local politicians encourage racism and militarism in the street. That just kind of spoke to me, because I think as we're having these conversations about racism in our communities, we are having conversations about reimagining public safety, reimagining police forces, and hopefully moving away from militarism and military grade equipment in our police forces. And that's something that I truly advocate for. One thing I like to tell people is that, my brother, much like Representative Lovick, is a veteran of the police force in Washington, D.C. Metro. He's been on the force over 20 years. He's also an active Air Force member. And so we had a great conversation on Kitchen Conversations a few weeks ago about reimagining policing in 2020. But part of that was about demilitarization. And he had a really funny comment because he's like, we don't want that stuff. He's like, and he's at a point in the department in Washington, D.C. Metro, right? That's a big city. And it's so this is not coming from someone with a very small town myopic view. This is someone with a big picture view. And he's like, look, this stuff is old, it's clunky, it's not useful, and it's not what police should be using against its citizens. It was really good and refreshing to hear that coming from a police officer. It was good because those are the kind of conversations we have at our kitchen table. And I'll tell you, as a leader, it's something that I will be advocating for at the state level, is to really, as we reimagine community safety, is getting the military equipment out of these local jurisdictions, because it's simply not needed. And, you know, in his words, it's really not wanted. So thank you for asking that question, Christy.
That's a good one. And I know Christy's husband has been very involved in getting people to turn in their unwanted guns here in our city, to drop their guns. It's good. So we are running out of time. And so to follow up, there are a few questions and comments that perhaps need some follow up. So what's the plan here, April?
Yes.
And
so what we're going to do is we're going to capture the chat. I love Zoom because it does capture the chat for us. So we'll be able to follow up with you directly on your questions and comments. But I do want to make a plug for Snohomish Equity. I saw that it was mentioned in the chat box. And so their trainings, their information, I don't know if someone can pull up their website and throw it maybe in the chat box. I love Snohomish Equity because they're out there getting it done in your community, and they've got real-time actionable resources available to you, things like bystander training. And I'm actually going to plug their book club because I'm a book person. And so they actually have this phenomenal book club. So you can read books that are not only about, you know, anti-racism, but just culturally making you more culturally competent. So if you haven't checked out that resource, please do. But we will get back to everyone if there are questions that haven't been answered. And of course, I think Sam put in Representative Lovick's information in the chat box. You can reach me at aprilberg.com. I love to answer emails and having conversations, you know, just like this, because I can't be at your door. So I want to be, you know, on the other side of the phone call or via the internet so that I can make sure to get your question answered.
That's good. And we do have posting out. We have the SnohomishForEquity.org. A couple of people posted that. It's great. And quickly, April, before we go, you were involved in a horrific accident. It looks to me like clearly you're vertical, you're upright, and you're smiling, and you're doing great. And you're in some ways, perhaps, you know, doing this via the internet is the best way to reach out, since going door to door, not only COVID, but also with injury would be difficult. And we're just so proud of you and so happy that you're here, and proud of John Lovick. He's one of my champions, and he always has been, always will be. And Sam, it's great to see you here too. So I'm going to pull the plug on this and say goodbye to all our good friends who are here. And we thank you for showing up. And please show up for April via email, and for Sam and John Lovick via email too. And as they say, they will follow through with chat stuff here. And I'll get to see you around town.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a great rest of your night. Thanks, Sam. Thanks,
And
Linda. Great to see you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kyoko. I see you. Oh, it's great to see you. Oh, awesome. Thank you, everyone.